The Meridian Tower parking structure smells like concrete dust and something chemical, industrial, the kind of smell that accumulates in underground spaces where air doesn't move naturally. I noticed it on my first night, during the orientation walkthrough with Derek, the day shift supervisor. He showed me the office, the scanner system, the CCTV monitors, and then he told me something that seemed contradictory. He said my job was to watch the building, but he also said that most nights I'd barely have anything to do. I asked him what barely anything meant, and he gave me a look that suggested the question itself revealed I didn't understand the position I'd accepted. I needed the job more than I needed to understand it. I was 34, financially compromised by a series of decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but had accumulated into a kind of quiet catastrophe. My lease was month to month. My previous employment had ended when the company decided to eliminate the entire customer service department and outsource the work to a call center somewhere that paid less. I'd spent 6 weeks looking for comparable work, and nothing had materialized when the Meridian listing came through. Security officer overnight, 40 hours a week, $32 an hour. I applied within an hour. The interview was perfunctory. They'd called me back the next day with an offer. Now I was here, concrete dust in my lungs, training from a man who seemed to think my questions were naive. The orientation lasted 90 minutes. Derek covered the basic systems, the emergency procedures, the protocols for responding to alarms or unauthorized entry attempts. The Meridian served 17 different office suites, a medical clinic, and an upscale hotel on the upper floors. During the day, the structure processed hundreds of vehicles. At night, after 9 p.m., the gates would close automatically, and entry would require a valid access card or a call to the security office. My job was to be present in the office, monitor the feeds, conduct 2 walkthroughs per 8-hour shift, one at midnight and one at 4 a.m., and maintain documentation of anything unusual. And that was the framework, and it sounded straightforward enough. Derek handed me a manual that was about 40 pages long. Most of it was forms and procedures. There were sections on how to log vehicle entries and exits, how to escalate emergencies, how to respond to fire alarms, how to contact the building management. The final section was titled Operational Awareness, and it was 3 paragraphs long. It said, security personnel should maintain awareness of the building's normal operational patterns. There are certain access points and certain times when authorized personnel may enter the building through channels outside of standard gated entry. These instances are documented through independent systems and do not require security office notification unless there is a direct safety concern. Maintain observation without interference. Report only critical security breaches, not routine authorized access. I read that section twice. It seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. Derek saw me reading it and said, that basically means if you see something that seems off but doesn't seem dangerous, you probably don't need to report it. The building has a lot of secured systems. Not everything goes through the public entry points. I asked him for a specific example. He said maintenance, deliveries, contractors. You'll figure it out. I started my first shift on a Tuesday evening in March. The building at night was different from how it was during orientation. With fewer people moving through it, the space felt larger and emptier. The parking structure had 7 levels, and the office where I worked was on the ground floor, adjacent to the main gate. From my desk, I could see 3 of the 6 CCTV monitors that covered the structure. One focused on the main entry and exit, and 2 covering the middle levels. Here's the other 3 monitored the upper levels and the basement section. The night was quiet. By midnight, when I did my first walkthrough, the structure held maybe 40 vehicles, most of them parked in numbered spots that belonged to residents of the adjacent hotel or employees of the medical clinic. I moved through each level, scanning checkpoints on my handheld device, noting the vehicle counts, observing for anything that seemed wrong. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. The structure was exactly what it appeared to be, a building filled with parked cars, secure, monitored routine. By 4 a.m., when I did my second walkthrough, 15 vehicles had left and only a handful of new ones had arrived. I finished the walkthrough, returned to the office, and documented everything in the log. Derek arrived at 6 a.m. to relieve me. And he asked if I'd had any issues. I said no, everything was quiet. He nodded like that was the expected answer, and I went home to my apartment to sleep for a few hours before returning for my next shift. The first 2 weeks were like that. Quiet, predictable, lonely in the way that night work is lonely, where you're awake and aware while the rest of the world is sleeping, and you exist in a kind of isolated present tense. But the work was stable, the pay was regular. I began to settle into the rhythm, to understand that this job was going to be fine, manageable, and reliable enough to buy me time to figure out what came next. Then, on the 15th night of my employment, I noticed the car. It was in space 4B on level 3 during my midnight walkthrough. A dark blue sedan, some kind of mid-size vehicle, fairly nondescript. And nothing about it suggested anything unusual. It was parked neatly within the lines, a normal car in a normal space. But when I checked my handheld scanner against the overnight vehicle log, the space showed as unoccupied. I scanned the space directly, thinking maybe the system was delayed in registering the arrival. The scanner confirmed the checkpoint location, but there was no vehicle record associated with it. I made a note in my manual log and continued the walkthrough. 4 other spaces had vehicles without corresponding entry records, which didn't surprise me anymore. Derek had explained that some vehicles were registered to tenants in the building and didn't need to pass through the public gates. They had direct access from the tower above. That made sense. I finished the walkthrough, returned to the office, and documented what I'd found. I didn't report the unregistered vehicles as anomalies because they didn't seem anomalous enough to warrant escalation. They were just cars parked in spaces. The next night during my midnight walkthrough, the blue sedan was in space 4B again. Same space, same vehicle, I thought. I checked the logs again. Still no entry record. I noted it again. This time, something about the repetition bothered me. If it was a tenant vehicle with direct building access, wouldn't there be some record somewhere? Wouldn't there be a way to verify the legitimacy? I pulled up the CCTV footage from the previous evening when I got back to the office. I wanted to see when it had arrived, to understand if maybe I'd missed it during my first walkthrough. I found the camera angle that covered level 3. I set the timestamp to start at 6 p.m. before my shift began. I watched vehicles come and go, people leaving work, arriving for hotel stays, shifting in and out. The space 4B remained empty through all of it. At 9 p.m., the garage had quieted down. Fewer movements. The space was still empty. At 9:30, I watched the timestamp advance in the video and the space was still vacant. Then, at 9:45, the timestamp jumped forward to 9:47, and the blue sedan was there. I rewound. I watched it again. Between 9:45 and 9:47, according to the video, the vehicle simply appeared. Not a slow arrival, not a backing in, not any visible approach. Just an absence that became presence. I checked if maybe I was looking at the wrong space. No, the space number was visible on the concrete wall. This was definitely 4B. Also, I looked at the adjacent spaces and other cameras on level 3. No approach path. No vehicle moving toward the location. Just an empty space and then a parked car. I felt something shift in my stomach. It wasn't quite fear, not yet. It was more like the discomfort of noticing something that shouldn't exist within a framework that seemed to have clear rules. The framework was vehicles arrived visibly, they were logged, they existed in the system. This vehicle had violated that framework. It existed in the space, but not in the arrival sequence. The next morning, I asked Derek about it during the handoff. I described the vehicle and the missing entry time. I said it might indicate a camera malfunction or a system sync issue. Derek's expression changed immediately. He went from his normal baseline of mild indifference to something more controlled, like he was now performing the role of a supervisor rather than actually being one. He said, "Did you report it?" I said I hadn't. Not officially, because I was still trying to understand what I was looking at. He said, "Don't report it. Note it in your personal log if you need to track it, but don't put it in the incident system. Understood?" I said I understood, though I didn't. Derek continued. The building has existing arrangements with certain parties. Not everything that happens here goes through standard protocols. If you see something that doesn't match the normal patterns, you're probably seeing something that's been approved through other channels. Your job is to monitor the space, not to question its use. I asked him what kind of arrangements he meant. He said that was above my pay grade, and if I kept asking questions about things above my pay grade, I wouldn't be working here very long. He said it not unkindly, but definitely. It was a boundary clearly drawn. For the next week, I continued to see the blue sedan in space 4B. Almost every night it appeared, usually sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., according to the CCTV timeline. I stopped trying to verify it through the entry systems. I just noted its presence and moved on. Derek's instruction had been clear. Monitor, don't question. Document, don't report. But ignoring something and forgetting about it are different things. I couldn't forget that the vehicle was there. I couldn't ignore the fact that it appeared in ways that contradicted how the building systems were supposed to function. The existence of the car, for no clear reason, began to feel like the one real thing happening in an otherwise empty and routine space. It became the only interesting thing in 8 hours of concrete and fluorescent light. A week and a half into my employment, I tried to photograph the car. I thought maybe if I had an independent record of it, some documentation that didn't rely on the building systems, I could understand what I was looking at. I took a few photos with my phone during one of the walkthroughs, focusing on the license plate and the overall vehicle. The photos came out blurry and slightly unfocused, which was strange because my phone usually took clear pictures. I tried again the next night with the same result. The images were technically visible but frustratingly unclear. The license plate unreadable, the vehicle details obscured. I mentioned to one of my co-workers, another overnight security guard named Marcus, that I was having trouble getting clear photos in the garage. I didn't mention why I was taking photos. Marcus, who worked 3 nights a week and was the closest thing I had to a colleague in the overnight rotation, said the lighting could be tricky and the fluorescence sometimes interfered with camera sensors. He said that with confidence, as if he'd considered this exact problem before, which made me wonder if he had. I started asking Marcus indirect questions about the building. I asked if he'd ever noticed anything unusual during his shifts. He said everything seemed normal. I asked if there were any vehicles that he'd seen without entry records. He paused a moment, then said, "Yeah, sometimes. It's just how it is here. The building has its own systems that don't always sync with ours." The way he said it, with a kind of practiced simplicity, suggested he'd given this answer before, maybe to himself. After Marcus left, I thought about what Derek had said. The building has existing arrangements. There are channels outside of standard gated entry, certain parties. The language was deliberately vague, designed to communicate that I shouldn't ask for specifics. But the implication was clear. Something was being hidden, and I was being hired partly to serve as a witness to that hiding, someone who would see it and not report it, thereby legitimizing the process of its existence. I guess that thought disturbed me more than any obvious danger would have. If the building was doing something genuinely harmful, obviously illegal, I could rationalize leaving. But if the building was doing something that the staff had been trained to ignore, something that required people like me to exist in a kind of knowing silence, that was a different kind of problem. That was a problem that implicated me by my presence alone. I decided to investigate more systematically. I couldn't do much with the public records. The building was owned by a holding company whose actual operations were obscured through layers of corporate registration. But I could study the CCTV more carefully. I could map when the car appeared and disappeared. I could look for patterns. What I discovered was that Space 4B was never actually empty. After the first night I noticed it. The car was there almost constantly. Sometimes it would be gone during my second walk through at 4 a.m., but it would always return by midnight, if it had ever left at all. The vehicle was establishing itself as a permanent or semi-permanent fixture of the garage. A space that was supposed to be transitory, a place where people parked and then left, had become something more like a staging area or a storage location. I also noticed something about the CCTV coverage. The camera that covered level 3 had a specific angle that actually didn't capture the entire Space 4B area. The corner of the space was visible, and you could see that something was parked there. But the camera's field of view was oriented such that it didn't show the full vehicle, not in detail. That seemed deliberate, whereas the building had surveillance everywhere. But it had managed to position one camera in such a way that Space 4B was only partially visible. The more I noticed these details, the more I understood that this wasn't a glitch or a malfunction. This was by design. The building was structured to allow something to happen in Space 4B while maintaining the appearance of full surveillance. The system was engineered to hide something in plain sight. 3 weeks into my employment, I made a decision that I knew I probably shouldn't make. I went into the maintenance office on the ground floor during my shift. The door was locked, but the key was hanging on a hook in the main office. Derek had shown it to me during orientation, explaining that I might need to access building schematics if there was an emergency. I used the key and let myself into the maintenance office. The space was small, maybe 12 by 14 feet, lined with filing cabinets and shelves holding tools, spare parts, and various other equipment. A desk in the corner held a computer terminal. I started looking through the filing cabinets, feeling guilty and aware that I was doing something I probably shouldn't, but also feeling like I'd already been positioned inside this situation and I deserved to at least understand what the situation actually was. In the third drawer of the second cabinet, I found a folder labeled Level 3 Allocation. Inside were documents that seemed to be maintenance records and access logs, but they were formatted differently from the standard logs I used. These were older, handwritten in some cases, and they had dates going back 7 years. I saw repeated references to Space 4B with notations like weekly inspection, maintained access, and cryptic entries that said things like confirmed occupant status or access parameters verified. One document dated from about 2 years ago had a name on it, Robert Chen. Next to the name was a notation, Building System Access, Independent Verification Protocol. Below that was an authorization stamp from someone whose signature was illegible, but whose title read Operations Director, Meridian Management Group. I took a photo of the document with my phone. The photo came out clear, which was the first clear photograph I'd taken inside the building since I'd started working there. That clarity felt significant, like the building itself was revealing something when I accessed the right location and the right moment. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it and left the maintenance office. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing. I had found something, but I wasn't sure what I'd found. There was a name, Robert Chen, and a connection between that name and Space 4B. But I still didn't understand what the connection meant. Who was Robert Chen? What did independent verification protocol mean? Why did someone need building system access through a specific allocation system? For the next few days, I did something I shouldn't have done, and something that, looking back, seems obviously obsessive. I searched online for Robert Chen with different combinations of keywords related to the building, the city, the year the document was created. Nothing came back that seemed relevant. Either Robert Chen was a common enough name that searching for it with other variables just returned thousands of results, none of which seemed connected to the Meridian Tower or to anything in particular. I also pulled more CCTV footage, trying to understand if maybe I could see the actual person who was using Space 4B. Maybe the car belonged to Robert Chen, and he was accessing the building through some kind of regular schedule. Maybe I could identify him, or at least understand something about the pattern of his presence. But the camera angle for level 3 made that almost impossible. I could see that the vehicle was there, but I couldn't see anyone approaching it, entering it, or leaving from it. It was like the car existed in a kind of bubble of semi-visibility. It was present enough to be documented, but obscured enough to be deniable. As the building had created a space where something could happen, while technically never being seen happening. After about 10 days of this quiet investigation, Derek called me into his office. I'd gone in for what I thought was a normal shift handoff, and instead he'd closed the door behind me and asked me to sit down. I knew I'd made a mistake. I knew that somehow my investigation had been noticed. Derek said, "I want to be clear about something, Nathan. This job is simple. You come in, you monitor the building, you watch for actual security threats, a water leak, a break-in, a fire, something that genuinely threatens the integrity of the structure or the safety of the people in it. That's what you report. Everything else stays inside the building. You understand? I said I understood. He said, The building has had night security for many years. We've had good security, reliable security. Some of the security staff have been here for a long time, and some have only been here for a short time. The ones who have stayed are the ones who understand the difference between seeing something and reporting something. Do you understand that difference? I said yes. He said, good. Then we're fine. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep monitoring. Keep documenting. And keep not reporting things that aren't actual security threats. You do that, the job is yours as long as you want it. You stop doing that, we'll find someone else. Someone who understands the structure of how things work here. I asked him what the building was actually using Space 4B for. He said, that's not your question to ask. Your question is whether it's a security threat. The answer to that question is no. Space 4B is not a security threat. It's an allocated space. It's used by someone who has authorization. And your job is to watch it and understand that it's not your concern. He dismissed me after that, and I left the office feeling like I'd been warned without being overtly threatened. The message was clear. I'd been noticed investigating, and I'd been told to stop. The job I'd taken, which I needed for financial survival, was conditional on my willingness to ignore what I was observing. Derek wasn't being hostile about it. He was being administrative. He was explaining the actual structure of the job, which was different from the job description. I didn't access the maintenance office again. I didn't search for Robert Chen anymore. I didn't try to take clearer photographs of Space 4B. I did my job. I monitored the building. I conducted my walkthroughs. I documented what I saw. And I didn't report the car in Space 4B as an anomaly because I'd been instructed not to. The strange part was how quickly I adapted to this. Within a few days, the discomfort of knowing something I wasn't supposed to talk about faded into a kind of routine acceptance. The car was there. It existed. It was part of the building's operation. And I was being paid to be aware of it without being curious about it, to see it without understanding it, to document its existence while not acknowledging that existence through any official channel. But adaptation and comfort aren't the same thing. I still felt uncomfortable with the situation. I still felt like I was part of something wrong, or at least something I didn't understand and wasn't supposed to question. I just learned to live with that discomfort because the discomfort of financial instability was worse. 4 weeks into my employment, something changed. During my midnight walk through on a Thursday, I found the Space 4B completely empty. Not just the car missing, the space was empty in a way that seemed deliberate. The concrete was clean. There were no personal items, no trace of ongoing occupancy. It looked like it had been thoroughly cleared. I checked the CCTV for that evening. The car had been there when I started my shift. By the time I did my walkthrough at midnight, it was gone. The video showed it leaving sometime around 11:30, moving toward the exit ramp at a normal speed. Completely normal, nothing unusual, and the vehicle went through the gate and was gone. I waited to see if it would return. It didn't come back that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Space 4B remained empty. For the first time in over 3 weeks, the space showed as it should have. Unoccupied, available, showing no sign of any extended use. When Derek arrived for the morning shift, I asked him if he knew anything about the vehicle being gone. He said that the space had been deallocated, that the arrangement had concluded, and that I shouldn't expect to see the car anymore. I asked him if that meant the situation was resolved, whatever the situation had actually been. He said, the situation is resolved as far as you're concerned. Space 4B returns to normal operation. You continue doing what you're doing. Nothing changes for you. But something had changed. The knowledge that the car had been there, that it had been part of the building systems, that I had been positioned to monitor it and not report it. That knowledge didn't go away just because the physical car had left. I'd been complicit in something, even if I'd only been complicit through silence. I'd been paid to see and not see simultaneously, and I'd accepted the terms of that payment. Over the next month, I continued working at the Meridian. The building returned to a kind of normalcy. The night shifts were quiet. Vehicles came and went through standard entry points. There were no more anomalies, no more spaces that violated the system's logic. Everything operated exactly as it was supposed to. But something in me had changed about the job. I understood now what the position actually entailed. The title was security officer. But the actual job was more like complicit observer. You were hired to be present, to maintain records, to be a warm body that could attest to the building's normal operations, while also maintaining a kind of willful ignorance about specific uses of specific spaces. The job was the performance of security while actually being in service of something else, something that required witnesses who would be silent. I also began to understand the previous comment I'd overheard from Marcus about how Derek had said, "Some of the security staff have been here for a long time." I started thinking about that. How long had previous night security staff worked here? How many of them had gone through the same process I was going through? How many of them had noticed the car, been instructed not to report it, and then adapted to that instruction? I did some research, looking at online forums and job review sites. I found reviews of Meridian Tower's security department. There were comments from people with names I didn't recognize, but the patterns in their comments were consistent. They mentioned unusual protocols, management expecting you to overlook things, staying quiet about building operations, not being asked why you left, but understanding that certain questions don't have answers. One review from 3 years ago said, "Good pay if you don't ask questions." I left after 2 months because I couldn't stop asking them. I'd worked at Meridian for 5 weeks now. I was approaching the same timeline where others had apparently made the choice to leave or adapt. I found myself thinking more and more about which choice I was going to make. The financial mathematics were simple. I was making more money than I'd made in my previous job. The work was not physically demanding. The hours were consistent. I had no other job prospects. My savings were still depleting. In the next 3 weeks, I would have a decision point. Either commit to staying and accepting the terms of the job, or leave and face a return to financial instability. 6 weeks into my employment, Derek called me in again. This time he wasn't closing the door and warning me. He was offering me something. He said, "You've been here long enough now that you understand how the building operates. You're reliable. You don't ask unnecessary questions. I want to offer you a position in a different building, same company, different location. It's a larger structure, more complex, more responsibility. It pays $38 an hour instead of $32. The role is the same: overnight security, monitoring, documentation. But it comes with the expectation that you understand how the building's operational environment works, and you're prepared to maintain the discretion that we've been training you in. It was, I realized, a test of my commitment. If I took the offer, I was committing to the system. I was moving from accidentally complicit to deliberately participating. I was accepting the architecture of the job, which was about providing cover for operations I didn't understand while being paid not to understand them. I told Derek I needed to think about it. He said, "Don't think too long. The position needs to be filled. If you're not interested, Mika, I'll find someone else who understands the value of the opportunity." I went home and sat in my apartment for hours, thinking about that statement. The value of the opportunity. The opportunity to earn more money by being more deliberately blind to something. The opportunity to move from passive witness to active participant in a system designed to hide something in plain sight. That night, I went back to my notes and research. I looked at the photograph I'd taken of the document with Robert Chen's name on it. I looked at the reviews from people who'd left the job, and I thought about Derek's language, about arrangements and channels outside of standard access and independent verification protocols. I realized something. I would probably never know what Space 4B actually was. Robert Chen was a name on a piece of paper, whereas the car was a vehicle that appeared and disappeared. The building's arrangement was obscured by deliberate design. I could ask questions, but I'd already been told that those questions wouldn't be answered. I could investigate further, but I'd already been warned that investigation would cost me the job. So the choice wasn't really between knowing and not knowing. The choice was between accepting the terms of not knowing and leaving, between staying in a system that deliberately kept me ignorant and leaving to face financial instability again. Derek had made the choice clear. He'd offered me more money to move to a different building and do the same job. The implication was that I'd understand what the building was actually doing, that my discretion would be validated through increased compensation, and that I'd become part of a broader network of people who understood how the buildings actually operated while maintaining the public face of standard security. A week passed. I didn't call Derek. I didn't accept the offer, but I also didn't decline it. I just existed in a state of not deciding, which was its own kind of decision. I came in for my shifts at Meridian. I monitored the building. I conducted my walkthroughs. I watched Space 4B, which remained empty, but which still carried the weight of what had happened there. Then Derek came to find me. He said, "I need an answer about the other building." I said, "I don't think I'm going to take it." He said, "Then I think it's time for you to move on from Meridian as well." I said, "What? Why? I've been doing my job." He said, "Yes, you have. But you've also made it clear that you don't understand the nature of the opportunity we're offering. If you can't see the value in what we're building here, you're not the right fit for the organization. We need people who understand the structure. You don't." And just like that, I was terminated. Not dramatically, not with any accusation or threat. I was simply let go because I'd refused to commit to the system. I wasn't fired for poor performance or for investigating the car or for violating protocols. I was fired for the implication that if I didn't accept the promotion, I wasn't loyal enough to the organization's actual interests. I left the Meridian Tower that same day, and I didn't return. That was 3 months ago. I've been unemployed since then, or underemployed. I picked up part-time work at a retail store, which pays $14 an hour and barely covers rent. I've applied to 37 different jobs in that time. I've had 3 interviews. None of them resulted in offers. The economy has made everything harder again. I'm sliding backward into the financial precarity I was in when I first took the Meridian job. I think about that job almost every day. I think about the car in Space 4B. I think about Robert Chen and what his name meant. I think about Derek's offer to move to a different building, and I wonder what I would have become if I'd accepted it. I think about Marcus and the other night security staff who work at places like Meridian, who understand the structure and maintain the discretion. And I wonder how they justify it to themselves. But I also think about the simple mathematics of survival. If I do, I wonder how long I can afford not to work in a building like Meridian. I wonder if my principled refusal to participate in the system is actually just naivete or if it's something more solid. I wonder if the difference between knowing something is wrong and being paid not to acknowledge that knowledge is actually a meaningful difference, or if it's just a distinction I'm using to make myself feel better about compromises I'm probably going to end up making anyway. 2 weeks ago, I received an email from a company called Strategic Building Services. They said they were hiring night security personnel for multiple locations across the city, that they'd received my application from months ago, and that they were now in a hiring phase. The positions paid $35 an hour with advancement opportunities based on performance. The hiring manager's name was Gregory Chen. I stared at that email for a long time. I didn't know if Gregory Chen and Robert Chen were related. I didn't know if this was a coincidence or if somehow my employment information had moved between companies and had been flagged as a person who would be receptive to certain kinds of positions. I didn't know anything except that the offer was on the table, that the money was good, and that my current situation was becoming increasingly unsustainable. I didn't apply, but I also didn't delete the email. I left it in my inbox, unresponded to, like a question I wasn't ready to answer, but also couldn't forget about. Yesterday, my landlord told me they're raising my rent by $200 a month, effective in 60 days. $200 I don't have. Indeed, it's in a market where finding comparable apartments at my current rent is nearly impossible. In 60 days, I will either need to find a significantly better paying job, or I will need to find a different place to live that I can afford, which probably means moving to a neighborhood far enough from the city center that my commute to any job becomes extremely difficult. I've started thinking about calling Gregory Chen. I've started thinking about what it would mean to take that job at Strategic Building Services. I've started telling myself that maybe I was wrong to refuse the Meridian position, that maybe the system isn't as sinister as I'd thought, that maybe it's just the way buildings operate in the city, and maybe it's not my responsibility to judge or resist it. I've started thinking about how the previous security staff had adapted to the system, how they'd stayed or left, but either way had moved on with their lives, how the building would continue to operate with or without my moral objections, how the Space 4B equivalent at whatever building Strategic Building Services assigned me to would continue to exist, would continue to require witnesses, would continue to look for people who understood that the choice wasn't really between right and wrong, but between working and not working, between surviving and not surviving. And I've started to understand that Derek's threat had been implicit in his offer. The offer wasn't just a promotion, it was a statement that the organization wanted to see how committed I would be to the system. By refusing, I'd proven that I wasn't committed enough. By being fired, I'd been pushed back out into the world without the financial stability that the job had provided. And now, facing the loss of my housing, I would probably come back. And when I came back, I would probably accept whatever terms were offered, because I would understand better what the alternative actually costs. The system, I realize now, doesn't actually need me to agree with it. It doesn't need me to understand what space 4B is, or why Robert Chen needs access, or what the building is actually doing with those hidden spaces. The system just needs me to be desperate enough to take the job, knowledgeable enough to understand what's happening, but not so knowledgeable that I can prove anything, and financially dependent enough that I can't afford to have a crisis of conscience. The system needs people like me, people who will see something and not report it because the alternative is worse. People who will adapt to knowing something they're not supposed to talk about. People who will gradually convince themselves that their silence isn't complicity, that they're just doing their job, that it's not their responsibility to question the structures they work within. And the terrifying part is that it works. It works because the alternative, unemployment, homelessness, genuine poverty, is worse than the discomfort of ethical compromise. The system wins not through force or threats, but through the simple mathematics of survival. I haven't called Gregory Chen yet, but I know I will. Probably within the next week, certainly within the next month. The email is still in my inbox, and each time I check my mail, I see it. Or each time my landlord reminds me about the rent increase, each time my savings depletes a little further, each time I fail to hear back from one of my applications to more legitimate work, I become more willing to make that call. And when I do call, I'll probably be offered a position similar to the one at Meridian. I'll probably accept it. I'll probably move through the same process of initial discomfort, gradual adaptation, and eventual acceptance. I'll probably become someone who knows what they're not supposed to know and is paid not to talk about it. And the most disturbing part of that realization is how normal it seems now, how inevitable, how much it feels like the only reasonable choice available to me, even though I understand exactly what the choice means. The car is gone from space 4B, but the system that required it to exist, that required people like me to witness its existence and not report it, that system is still there. It's still operating. It's still looking for night security staff who understand how to be complicit. And soon, very soon, I'll probably be one of them again.